I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
I've sat here for 12 months telling people how every day it gets worse, every day it gets worse. Without UNRWA, that will continue.
Israel officially notifies the United Nations of its decision to cut ties with the agency for Palestinian refugees amid warnings of an impending famine in Gaza.
UNIFIL peacekeepers are staying, they're holding the line, and they're determined to continue doing what they're mandated to do.
Grave concern over the rising impact of the Israel-Hezbollah conflict on Lebanon's civilian population and UN peacekeepers. And delving into tsunami awareness, a discussion about how prepared the world is to handle this force of nature. Next.
The world's attention remains focused on the conflicts in the Middle East. Diplomats here at the UN are concerned about Israel's military operations in Lebanon and Gaza and the humanitarian costs.
The hopelessness is really the only word left for Gaza. There's nowhere for anyone to go. 2.2 million people. You have to remind everybody that they're trapped. There is no way out of the Gaza Strip, and this bombing just continues all day, all night.
The World Food Program says the humanitarian situation in Gaza could soon escalate into famine as Israeli forces continue to severely restrict the entry of food and other supplies. The World Health Organization, along with the UN's Children's Fund and Palestinian Refugee Agency, resumed the polio vaccination campaign in besieged northern Gaza this week. Health workers reached more than 105,000 children with a second dose of the vaccine. It comes as Israeli forces have bombarded the last partially functioning hospital there. The Israeli military has banned the WHO and other medical missions from reaching the hospital, which suffers acute shortages of all basic medical supplies.
There's 3 hospitals in North Gaza: Kamal Adwan, Al-Ada, and Indonesian hospital. Indonesian hospital is not functional, and Kamal Adwan and Al-Ada are minimum functional. There are no functional primary healthcare centers or medical points in the north of Gaza.
Meanwhile, Israel has formally notified the president of the UN General Assembly that it is ending the decades-old cooperation agreement with the Palestinian Relief Agency. The agreement covered the protection, movement, and diplomatic immunity of the agency in Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. The law will take effect in late January, banning UNRWA's operations in Israel. UN officials say the new law leaves operations in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and Gaza at risk of collapse.
The Secretary General, he continues to believe that the work of UNRWA is performing in the occupied Palestinian territory is essential, and that there is no alternative to UNRWA as we see it. If the law is fully implemented and UNRWA makes it the Israeli government makes it impossible for UNRWA to operate, this will have no effect on Israel's responsibility to provide for the population, and any failure to provide the necessary support to the population will be Israel's responsibility.
In Lebanon, UN officials have expressed grave concern about the Israeli army's ongoing operations in southern Lebanon. The UN peacekeeping mission UNIFIL is coming under persistent attack while operating along the so-called Blue Line, which separates Lebanon and Israel. As concern mounts, the United Nations held a special televised dialogue to update the situation on the ground.
Attacks against peacekeepers are unacceptable. They are a violation of international law. And we've been repeatedly reminding the parties of their obligation to protect the peacekeepers, the safety and security of the peacekeeper. It's not an option, it's an obligation.
And of course, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asked that UNIFIL move, I believe, 5 kilometers north from their current positions. What would that objective be, and why would you say no to that?
We made a very considered decision that it was critical to stay. First of all, because there is a mandate, and we are duty bound to the mandate. The peacekeepers need to stay. Second, because we thought that if those positions along the blue line are abandoned, then they would likely be occupied by one party or the other. That would be very bad for many reasons, including the perception of impartiality and neutrality of the United Nations.
Around the world, combatants are engaged in dozens of armed conflicts. Those battles impact countless lives. The ongoing conflict between Sudan's military and a paramilitary group has entered its 19th month. Briefing the Security Council, the Assistant Secretary General for Africa said the fighting has become a major source of destabilization in the Horn of Africa and the Sahel regions. Thousands have been killed and more than 11 million people have been displaced. It's resulted in security, humanitarian, and economic consequences, with Sudan's neighbors bearing a heavy burden.
The arrivals of displaced people fleeing the fighting in the Sudan have added to the strain on already limited resources in Abyei. The local population continues to face economic hardship as basic goods and commodities have become scarce.
Let's take a look at some of the other issues on the UN's agenda. The Security Council discussed the rising tensions on the Korean Peninsula following Pyongyang's launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile last month. China has called on all parties to exercise restraint and work together to ease the situation.
The Korean Peninsula issue is long-standing and complex. It's essentially a security issue stemming from the remnant of the Cold War, the absence of a peace mechanism, and the lack of mutual trust between the United States and the DPRK. The pressing priority for all parties is to act in a rational and practical manner, promote mutual trust, and create a favorable environment for the de-escalation of the situation.
A new report from UN Habitat focuses on the challenges posed to cities by climate change and rapid urbanization. The report warns that over 2 billion people living in cities could be exposed to increased temperatures, floods, and other threats by the year 2040. Officials say an overall investment of over $5 trillion is needed to build and maintain climate-resilient systems. The UN's Humanitarian Affairs Agency has allocated nearly $40 million to help areas in West and Central Africa dealing with catastrophic flooding. More than 7 million people have been impacted across 16 countries.
Coming up.
One of the mottos we have in APEC is that we want to have an inclusiveness, we want to empower people, no? And we do not want to leave anyone behind.
UN Insider.
Leaders from nearly 24 countries will gather next week to discuss sustainable development, innovation, and inclusive economic growth. They are the key priorities for this year's APEC meetings in Lima, Peru. I spoke with Elmar Schuyler. He is the Foreign Minister of the host country, Peru. Minister Schuyler, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for coming.
As the APEC host and a country of diverse landscapes and diverse people, what do you hope to show the other member economies?
Well, let me say, first of all, that we are very happy and honored to be, for the third time, host of the APEC meeting. We are really happy and proud to present our country to the other 20 economies. So we are like warming up for the great event, which will take place between 11th and 17th of November. It's called the Leaders Summit Week, which will, there will convene about, well, the leaders of the 21 economies. Everybody is coming, and this is, of course, a great honor and a great challenge also. for Peru, for Peruvians, for the Peruvian government, but we are preparing ourselves the best we can.
When it comes to your economy and trade, what does Peru have to offer, and what is the message that you want to send?
Well, you know, Peru has very much to offer, and with a little bit of effort and help from our friends, for example, China is a very good friend of us. It's one of our trading partners. As a matter of fact, the first trading partner, Peru's. We can do a lot. Let me give you an example. 10 years ago or 15 years ago, nobody knew about Peruvian blueberries. Today, we're #1 world exporters. We're really the champions of blueberries exports. No? The same happened a few years ago with asparagus, for example. How did we do that? Well, we have the conditions, we have the geographical conditions. I think a little bit of technology was put into it, and a lot of effort, and really a lot of wish to do things in a very important professional manner. No? So we are multidimensional in a real sense of multidimensionality.
You mentioned China and Peru's trade relationship's been very strong.
Yes.
What areas of economic cooperation do you hope to see grow stronger at APEC?
Well, one thing that, one of the mottos we have in APEC is that we want to have an inclusiveness, we want to empower people, no? And we do not want to leave anyone behind. So in this sense, China is somehow an example, not only for Peru, but also for other economies, in the sense that the Chinese government led a strong development strategy, which took out of poverty millions of Chinese citizens in the last decade or so. So this is something exemplary. This is something we ought to repeat, to learn how to do that. So because this is the real meaning of not leaving anybody behind. I know that one of the main instruments to have this fight against poverty is work, is industry. It is also technology. It is also markets. And these are things in which all of them, China, I am sure, is keen to help Peru. And of course, other APEC economies which have similar conditions, social conditions as Peru.
Peru is about to inaugurate the largest port in the region, the Chanquay port. What are the hopes and the goals for not only opening up trade in Peru to the Asia Pacific, but largely the region?
Well, first of all, let me say that this port, which we have there, a small joke with the Chinese ambassador in Peru, is now, at last, we will have a direct route between Shanghai in China and Chancay in Peru. It is not only the port itself or the local impact, which is very big, it's really very big. We hope that this will be some kind of hub for all other ports in the South American Pacific. So this is one very important thing. The other, the consolidation and deconsolidation of cargo to and from South America.
Peru has been a very vocal supporter of multilateralism. How does the Peruvian government view China's efforts to reform global multilateral institutions like the United Nations, where everybody has an equal voice?
Yes, well, thank you. This is a very good and timely question. It's something that we have been discussing intensively amongst delegations during this General Assembly, but the discussion comes also from previous years. You see, San Francisco, the UN Charter, was an effort, a very, I think, very important effort which was born after a world war. And at the time, the configuration of the world was totally different as today. We are now more than 193 states. This is already a difference which is not only quantitative but also qualitative, but also the progress. Today, everybody, if they want to, can tap in through any digital media and see what they want to see and form their own opinion. So it is more public. So meaning to say, the institutions who were born with the San Francisco Charter, they have to change. They have to change. The world has changed in many ways, and it is time, I think, to rethink many structures and also many very important procedures which will have to be revisited.
Peru and China both have ancient civilizations, come from ancient civilizations. Your diplomatic ties go back 5 decades. How would you describe relations at the moment?
Well, right now I can say we are at a high point. We signed 10 years ago something, a free trade agreement which has enabled Peru not only to double or triple or make 5 times bigger, so almost 10 times. We are right now, we have a commercial a relationship of $30 billion, which may not very much mean to China, but for Peru is very important. China is our #1 trading partner. But it is not only that. China is a very big investor, not the biggest one, but a very big investor in Peru. And we have so many opportunities to invest in infrastructure. For example, infrastructure. We have what we call a gap, infrastructure gap of over $150 billion. And these are, of course, problematic for those communities that, for example, don't have electricity or don't have a decent road. I can say yes to that. But these are also big opportunities for companies interested in developing this infrastructure which lacks that particular community.
Minister Schuyler, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for this interview.
Peru and China are among the founding members of the United Nations, and the ties between the two nations date back centuries. The first members of Peru's Chinese community settled in the city's downtown in the 1850s. Today, the Chinese-descended community has become an integral part of Peruvian identity.
This is Chinese food, stir-fried in a wok at sizzling temperatures, but with a twist. The chef is not Chinese, and this is not China, it's Peru, and everyone in this kitchen is Peruvian. Yet the attention to detail and the pride in preparing the food is evident. The driving force behind the quality control is Dr. Luis Zhong. For the last quarter of a century, this restaurant, San Joy Lai, in the heart of Lima's Chinatown, has been the family business.
Los chinos hicieron pedagogía culinaria. Enseñaron a comer y a cocinar la comida oriental china aquí en el Perú. Y por eso que los chifas se fueron imponiendo. Y por eso que los chifas, en aquel barrio chino decían, este es el barrio donde encuentras ricos y proletarios, famosos y olvidados. Aquí todo el mundo viene.
It's all about the food. Fresh ingredients, spices, prepared in an instant. Full tables and a long queue are proof enough. It's located in the heart of Lima's Barrio Chino, South America's oldest Chinatown. Chinese immigrants first settled here in this part of downtown Lima in the 1850s.
El único barrio étnico que hay en Perú. No hay otro barrio étnico. El Perú es de todas las sangres, pero no hay barrio japonés, no hay barrio italiano, no hay barrio judío. pero sí hay el único barrio chino del Perú.
The place is often little known to foreign visitors who may be surprised to find a large community of Chinese descendants known as Tusan in the Peruvian population.
Ever since the first Chinese laborers arrived in Peru more than 170 years ago, they integrated into Peruvian society through their food. Chinese restaurants called chifas provided cheap and easy meals for rich and poor alike. And some of those flagship dishes like fried rice and chicken noodles are now part of Peru's world-renowned cuisine.
Amid the common commercial interests and the boom in trade and investment that has surged this century, there is a common bond between the two nations that precedes all that and can be found around a table at the neighborhood chifa. At Antonio Lee's Wale restaurant in Lima's working-class La Victoria neighborhood, there are old-school reunions and family get-togethers. The restaurant's maitre d' is Liliana Com.
Para los chinos, claro, la comida es lo básico. Ellos siempre piensan que comer lo más fresco, comer lo que hay en el momento es mejor. Y para los peruanos también, que disfrutan tanto comer, todo se festeja alrededor de una mesa, ¿no? Un cumpleaños, un aniversario, una despedida, una graduación, un matrimonio. Entonces, está muy compenetrado. Ambas culturas sienten esa misma necesidad, inclusive de hablar de comida cuando ya acabaron de comer, ¿no? Pero eso, bueno,
Com's Chinese-born parents were among the pioneers of the chifa restaurants, which began in Lima and little by little spread to every corner of Peru. She continues her parents' legacy by respecting those Chinese values.
Sí, estuve en la China, pero aquí me siento bien. Yo soy peruana, soy limeña y estoy muy contenta de ser peruana, pero también muy orgullosa de mis raíces chinas, ¿no? Creo que es una buena combinación y pienso que es importante hacer puente de ambos para que haya más entendimiento entre ambas culturas.
And there are few places in the world like Peru where Chinese culture and food have become so integrated into the national identity.
Coming up,
the stakes, the consequences of a major tsunami are such that we really have to be prepared.
UN Insider.
All you need to know about China. China 24, only on CGTN.
This week, the world marked Tsunami Awareness Day. Globally, 700 million people are at risk from tsunamis. These hugely powerful waves have caused more than 260,000 deaths over the past century, with economic losses surpassing $280 billion. A recent assessment found only half of the countries worldwide have adequate early warning systems. The UN is working to close this critical gap by 2027. The Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004 catalyzed global cooperation in disaster preparedness. I moderated a panel hosted by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, focused on progress made since 2004 and preparing future generations.
Today's discussions are focused on the progress since the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami.
The 2004 tsunami opened the world's eyes to the disasters that tsunamis can be.
Many of us of a certain age can remember when that happened and just seeing the pictures and how devastating it was.
Back in 2004, we were not prepared.
Miss Aishat Sharma, you were just about 4 years old when the Indian Ocean tsunami struck in the Maldives. Share with us what you can, what you remember from that day, what happened.
Having experienced firsthand the devastating of the tsunami, I understand the importance of preparedness.
We're touching on youth, we're touching on community preparedness, and we also don't want to forget about vulnerable populations.
In Indonesia, many of people say disaster is God's will. Many think we cannot do anything. It's our fate. However, they can understand that we can prepare our umbrella before it rains.
Effective policies and measures can significantly mitigate the impacts of even the most severe natural hazards, including tsunamis.
How would you characterize the coordination among governments and sharing of information and sharing of best practices?
By working together, we can strengthen early warning systems and better protect communities from the impacts of tsunamis.
We have come a long way since that dark moment, and we have built better and stronger, both physically, mentally, and spiritually.
We have always more pressing problems on our hands, but the stakes, the consequences of a major tsunamis are such that we really have to be prepared.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN Insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is a special edition of UN Insider.
UN Insider serves as an important window for the global audience to better understand multilateral diplomacy.
It's very important for the media to cover the United Nations, to seek to understand and tell the story in ways that the average person in the street can understand.
I think it's very important that the media should contribute to conveying important messages about the reality of today's challenges.
UN Insider has come to the UN, and we at the UN are so grateful to have it here. It is the only dedicated TV program to what is happening in the UN, and it is reaching so many people with, as it says in its title, inside the UN stories.
Media plays an important role in providing objective information across the world.
We think that media has a strong power of uplifting, what we are trying to convey as messages as developing countries.
We need the mobilization of all peoples, of whole government and whole of society, and media can help us to be informed so that we also can make our part.
I think the media is fundamental to enable citizens across the world, first of all, to understand what is the rationale of having the United Nations. It's not that there is one place on planet Earth that will tell the rest of the world what to do. It is a much more complex story.